This is between us and the wizard.
The Wicked Witch can't elude us forever.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
Wicked, for Good is the highly anticipated second and concluding installment of the cinematic adaptation of the stage musical Wicked, which itself is based on the 1995 novel by Gregory Maguire, a reimagining of L. Frank Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. The movie was produced by Universal Pictures in collaboration with Mark Platt and David Stone, with John M. Chu returning as director after the success of the first film. The screenplay is crafted by Winnie Halsman, who also wrote the original musical's book, in collaboration with Dana Fox, ensuring fidelity to the source material while adapting it for the cinematic medium. The music and lyrics are the creations of Stephen Schwartz, preserving the powerful and emotive songs that made the musical a worldwide sensation. Set in the fantastical land of Oz, the film blends musical, fantasy, and adventure genres, incorporating themes of friendship, moral ambiguity, political intrigue, and the complexities of fame and public perception. Unlike typical adaptations, the film expands on the moral and emotional dimensions of the characters, giving audiences a more nuanced understanding of the characters' motivations and the consequences of their choices. Picking up after the events of the first film, Wicked, for Good continues the journey of Elphaba, the green-skinned witch who has been branded the Wicked Witch of the West by the public and political powers of Oz, and Glinda, her former friend who has risen to fame as the symbol of goodness in the Emerald City. The story explores the aftermath of the confrontation with the wizard, who has manipulated events and maintained a carefully constructed narrative to preserve his authority. Elphaba, now living in exile in the western forests of Oz, dedicates herself to fighting for the rights of the oppressed animals, who have long been silenced and marginalized under the wizard's regime. Her resistance against systemic injustice positions her as both a heroic and feared figure, creating tension between her moral convictions and the perception of her as wicked. Glinda, on the other hand, grapples with the dissonance between her public persona as the epitome of goodness and her private guilt over the estrangement from Elphaba. Though celebrated and adored by the citizens of Oz, she is haunted by her inability to reconcile the past and confront the truths about the wizard's manipulations and Elphaba's sacrifices. The narrative skillfully balances the political and emotional arcs, showing how the lives of individual characters intersect with broader societal issues. As Glinda prepares for a high-profile wedding to Fiero, a romantic and political figure whose loyalty is continually tested, she must navigate the pressures of public expectation, her own conscience, and the lingering bond with Elphaba. Meanwhile, Elphaba's efforts to champion the animals and challenge the wizard put her at odds with both the regime and the citizens who fear her perceived wickedness. The tension escalates when public hysteria against witches intensifies, threatening the lives of Elphaba, her allies, and even innocent bystanders. The film's climax revolves around the moral and emotional confrontation between Elphaba and Glinda, as they confront the choices of the past, the consequences of betrayal, and the possibility of reconciliation. Themes of friendship, loyalty, truth, justice, and personal integrity are interwoven into the narrative, making the story both a fantastical spectacle and a deeply human tale. The cast of Wicked, for Good features returning actors in pivotal roles. Cynthia Erivo reprises her role as Elphaba, portraying the character's depth, strength, and vulnerability with remarkable nuance. Ariana Grande returns as Glinda, balancing the character's public charm and private struggles with an emotionally resonant performance. Jonathan Bailey plays Fiero, whose romantic and political decisions significantly impact the unfolding events, while Michelle Yeoh portrays Madame Morrible, a powerful figure who manipulates public opinion and influences the political landscape of Oz. Jeff Goldblum embodies the wizard, whose deceptions and machinations drive much of the conflict and serve as a central moral foil for both Elphaba and Glinda. The supporting cast includes characters such as Elphaba's sister and key political figures in Oz, all of whom contribute to the narrative stakes, tension, and ultimate resolution. The ensemble performances, combined with the elaborate musical numbers, elaborate costumes, and visually stunning set designs, create a cinematic experience that is both immersive and emotionally compelling. The film was officially released on November 21, 2025, and has a runtime of approximately 2 hours and 18 minutes. It is rated PG for thematic elements, action sequences, and some suggestive material, reflecting the darker and more complex tone compared to the first installment. The first official trailer was released in June 2025, generating significant buzz and anticipation among fans of the musical and general audiences alike. Marketing campaigns emphasize the continuation of Elphaba and Glinda's emotional arcs, the visual grandeur of Oz, and the intricate moral and political dynamics at play. Audiences can expect sweeping musical numbers, elaborate choreography, fantastical special effects, and a story that engages both heart and mind, maintaining the essence of the stage musical while exploring new cinematic dimensions. Wicked, for Good stands out not only as a conclusion to a beloved story but also as an exploration of the complexities of power, fame, friendship, and moral responsibility. The narrative delves into the consequences of public perception, the weight of societal expectations, and the courage required to stand for justice and truth in a world dominated by political machinations. The relationships between characters, particularly between Elphaba and Glinda, are depicted with emotional richness, highlighting the challenges of reconciling past betrayals and the enduring strength of genuine bonds. In addition to the character-driven drama, the film presents an expansive and meticulously crafted Oz, filled with magical landscapes, intricate cityscapes, and immersive visual storytelling that enhances the narrative's fantastical elements. The combination of music, performance, and visual spectacle makes the film a multidimensional experience, appealing to both longtime fans of Wicked and newcomers to the story. From a thematic perspective, the film explores the notion of duality, good versus evil, public versus private persona, appearance versus reality, while questioning simplistic moral judgments. Elphaba's journey challenges viewers to reconsider the definitions of wickedness and goodness, demonstrating that courage, conviction, and compassion are often misunderstood by society. Glinda's arc emphasizes the burdens of fame and the tension between personal integrity and public expectation, illustrating the emotional cost of performing a role prescribed by others. The interplay between these two central characters drives the narrative forward, creating dramatic tension, emotional resonance, and ultimately, a compelling resolution that underscores the enduring power of friendship, understanding, and self-realization. In terms of production, the film benefits from John M. Chu's direction, which balances musical sequences with narrative depth, ensuring that the spectacle of Oz does not overshadow character development. The screenplay skillfully adapts stage material for the screen, maintaining the essence of iconic songs and dialogue while expanding the story to explore political, moral, and social themes. Costume and makeup design contribute to character identity and visual storytelling, highlighting distinctions between classes, factions, and moral alignment within Oz. The cinematography captures both intimate emotional moments and grandiose musical set pieces, creating a visually rich experience that enhances the story's thematic depth. The film also emphasizes the consequences of societal actions and the importance of justice for marginalized groups, in this case represented by the animals of Oz. Elphaba's advocacy for their rights, in contrast with the complacency of Oz's ruling class, serves as a critique of systems of power and the challenges faced by those who resist oppression. These themes resonate with contemporary audiences, adding relevance and emotional weight to the narrative beyond its fantastical setting. Ultimately, Wicked, for Good is more than a musical fantasy, it is a story about courage, moral complexity, and the enduring significance of human connections. By the end of the film, audiences witness the culmination of Elphaba and Glinda's journey, the resolution of political and personal conflicts, and a reflection on the nature of good, evil, and the choices that define us. It stands as a testament to the creative vision of its makers and the timeless appeal of Oz, offering an experience that is both magical and profoundly human. The film's combination of musical brilliance, narrative sophistication, emotional resonance, and visual spectacle ensures its place as a landmark in contemporary musical cinema and a satisfying conclusion to a beloved story. The story's climax begins with an atmosphere thick with inevitability, tension, and high stakes. The filmmakers deliberately pace the escalation, letting each character's emotional and moral trajectory collide with the socio-political turbulence of Oz. Elphaba, who has spent much of the film maneuvering in shadows, is finally forced into a direct confrontation with both the authorities and Glinda. This confrontation is not merely physical but psychological, a reckoning of years of misunderstanding, ideological divergence, and unspoken loyalty. The filmmakers framed this sequence with wide, dynamic shots to capture the scope of Oz's unrest while using close-ups and slow-motion sequences to foreground the personal and emotional intensity of the protagonists. Every glance, gesture, and word carries the weight of their shared history and the expectations of a fearful society. Elphaba's power is on full display in these moments. Her magic, previously restrained by caution and strategy, becomes a manifestation of both righteous fury and moral resolve. She summons storms, redirects natural forces, and deflects attacks in a series of sequences that are both visually spectacular and symbolically charged. Each display of magic is accompanied by a carefully constructed musical motif, a blend of minor key intensity, swelling harmonics, and lyrical flourishes that convey both anger and deep-seated sorrow. The music underscores that her actions, though disruptive, are rooted in justice and compassion, challenging the audience to reconcile the outward perception of wickedness with the internal integrity of her motivations. Glinda's confrontation with Elphaba is equally nuanced. She stands as both mediator and enforcer, her public persona of radiant goodness clashing with private fear, longing, and unresolved affection. The filmmakers emphasize this duality through reflective surfaces, lighting contrasts, and a choreography of movement, Glinda often positioned in open light, Elphaba in shadow, yet their gazes continually intersect, creating a visual tension that mirrors their emotional bond. Dialogue in this sequence is sparse but precise, with silences loaded with subtext. Glinda's carefully chosen words reveal her struggle between allegiance to societal expectations and loyalty to her oldest friend. Every phrase is a negotiation, every hesitation a reflection of inner conflict, and every decision carries profound moral consequences. Secondary characters play critical roles in amplifying the narrative stakes during the climax. Fiyero, torn between his affection for Elphaba and his public duties, must make choices that reflect both personal integrity and the practical limitations imposed by a society teetering on the edge of chaos. Nessarose, whose arc has been defined by dependence and vulnerability, steps into moments of unexpected agency, illustrating the moral and emotional cost of both action and inaction. Bach's loyalty and courage, while less central, provide vital narrative contrast, highlighting the sacrifices made by those who choose to act according to conscience rather than fear. Each supporting character's choices ripple through the broader social fabric of Oz, creating a tapestry of interconnected consequences that underscore the film's thematic exploration of responsibility, integrity, and the ripple effects of moral decision-making. Societal unrest peaks alongside these personal confrontations. Citizens of Oz, previously silent or complicit, rise in reaction to the climactic events. The filmmakers stage these sequences with complex choreography, blending individual emotional responses with collective movement to convey the chaotic energy of a society grappling with fear, revelation, and hope. Crowd dynamics, camera movement, and visual motifs, shifting shadows, color contrasts, and layered perspectives, serve to create a palpable sense of tension and urgency. Music continues to play a central narrative role, with orchestration shifting fluidly between chaos and lyricism to mirror both the collective unrest and the intimate emotional stakes of the protagonists. Thematically, the climax crystallizes the film's central motifs, the tension between perception and reality, the consequences of moral courage, and the complexity of human, and magical, relationships. Elphaba's actions challenge societal labels of wickedness, demonstrating that morality is not a matter of public decree but of intent, empathy, and the courage to act against injustice. Glinda's responses illustrate the cost of compromise, the fragility of public trust, and the weight of leadership under scrutiny. Their final interactions serve as a meditation on friendship, loyalty, and the endurance of emotional bonds under extreme pressure. The filmmakers ensure that this resolution is neither simplistic nor sentimental, it is emotionally authentic, morally complex, and visually resonant. As the narrative progresses toward closure, Elphaba and Glinda each undergo profound emotional transformations. Elphaba, despite being vilified, achieves a form of moral triumph, reclaiming agency over her story and her identity. She demonstrates that heroism is not defined by public approval but by adherence to principles, even in the face of isolation and misrepresentation. Glinda, having confronted the limitations and compromises of leadership, gains a nuanced understanding of morality, power, and the human cost of societal order. She emerges from the conflict with deeper self-awareness, tempered compassion, and a recognition that maintaining appearances often requires difficult personal sacrifices. The resolution of secondary arcs is handled with equal attention to emotional authenticity. Fiyero reconciles his conflicting loyalties, making choices that reflect both personal integrity and societal responsibility. Nessero's arc reaches a poignant closure, highlighting themes of agency, courage, and the cost of societal marginalization. Bach's loyalty and actions underscore the narrative's emphasis on the moral significance of individual choices in shaping collective outcomes. Even minor characters receive moments that illustrate the broader implications of the central conflict, reinforcing the film's comprehensive approach to character development and thematic coherence. Visually, the final sequences are meticulously crafted to reinforce thematic closure. The filmmakers employ a carefully balanced palette of greens, golds, and muted blues to signify resolution, emotional truth, and the restoration of moral equilibrium. Camera movement shifts from the dynamic tension of confrontation to more stable, reflective compositions, visually signaling the narrative's movement toward closure. Symbolic elements, such as mirrored surfaces, objects imbued with historical significance, and recurring natural motifs, are revisited to provide narrative continuity and thematic resonance, reminding the audience of the journey's complexity and the persistence of moral and emotional consequences. Musically, the climax and resolution integrate recurring motifs established earlier in the film, providing emotional coherence and reinforcing narrative arcs. Elphaba's musical lines, previously associated with defiance and isolation, evolved to incorporate themes of reconciliation, moral clarity, and personal triumph. Glinda's motifs, initially tied to public perception and internal conflict, gain depth through harmonies that reflect empathy, self-awareness, and enduring connection. Ensemble sequences provide counterpoints, illustrating the collective response of Oz's inhabitants and highlighting the interdependence of individual action and societal outcome. Thematically, the conclusion reinforces the central messages of the film, that morality is nuanced, that societal narratives can distort truth, that friendship and love can endure extreme adversity, and that courage often requires personal sacrifice. Elphaba's vindication, Glinda's growth, and the resolution of secondary characters collectively convey that the true measure of heroism lies not in public recognition but in fidelity to one's principles, empathy toward others, and resilience in the face of misunderstanding and fear. The film's closing sequences deliberately leave space for contemplation, encouraging the audience to reflect on the moral, social, and emotional questions raised throughout the narrative. As the final images unfold, the audience witnesses a world that has been irrevocably changed yet carries the promise of renewal. Oz is simultaneously scarred and hopeful, reflecting the real-world complexities of justice, power, and moral agency. The closing musical themes resonate with both melancholy and uplift, encapsulating the bittersweet triumphs and losses of the characters. The camera lingers on Elphaba and Glinda, emphasizing their enduring connection even in the face of societal misunderstanding, and on the broader landscape of Oz, underscoring the intertwined destinies of individuals and communities. The film's final moments balance closure with ambiguity, reinforcing the notion that life, morality, and friendship are rarely neat, but that perseverance, empathy, and courage leave a lasting legacy. In production terms, Wicked, For Good represents a culmination of cinematic craftsmanship, integrating advanced visual effects, intricate choreography, dynamic musical composition, and meticulous character direction. Director John M. Chu's vision ensures that the film operates on multiple levels simultaneously, as an emotionally resonant character study, a socially conscious narrative, and a visually spectacular musical fantasy. Every scene is infused with intentionality, from costume design to lighting, from orchestration to blocking, resulting in a narrative that is both immersive and intellectually engaging. The interplay of performance, music, and visual storytelling creates a layered experience, allowing audiences to engage with the film emotionally, intellectually, and aesthetically. Ultimately, Wicked, For Good achieves a synthesis of spectacle and substance. It challenges conventional notions of heroism, villainy, and narrative authority while providing an emotionally satisfying arc for its central characters. The film's resolution, though bittersweet, underscores the enduring power of friendship, the moral complexity of leadership, and the resilience of individuals who act according to conscience. In its conclusion, the audience is left with a sense of catharsis tempered by reflection, a reminder that true understanding requires looking beyond appearances, questioning societal narratives, and valuing the integrity of both self and others. The film begins with a striking establishing sequence that immediately differentiates it from the first installment. The camera sweeps over the Emerald City, now bathed in both shimmering gold and shadowed by an ever-present sense of authority. Chu's use of light and color here is deliberate. Gold symbolizes the superficial prosperity the wizard projects, while shadows signal the moral decay underlying his rule. The citizens move in coordinated patterns reminiscent of ballet, each step signaling the obedience required under the regime. This choreography establishes an implicit tension, beauty coexisting with oppression, and serves as a visual metaphor for the world's central conflicts. The opening musical motif, a variation of "No One Mourns the Wicked," is adapted into a minor key, creating a haunting overture that signals the moral complexities awaiting the audience. Elphaba's early forest sequences deepen her character, emphasizing her isolation, resilience, and moral clarity. The forest is both sanctuary and challenge, reflecting her dual role as protector of the oppressed animals and fugitive against a regime intent on her destruction. Cinematographer Daniel Mindel uses wide-angle shots to underscore Elphaba's solitude, juxtaposed with tight close-ups to capture emotional nuance. Erivo's portrayal conveys vigilance and heartbreak simultaneously, capturing the weight of exile, responsibility, and societal condemnation. Music and ambient sound blend seamlessly, with rustling leaves, distant animal calls, and orchestral swells creating a sonic landscape that mirrors Elphaba's inner life. The first significant musical number, a cinematic adaptation of No Good Deed, marks a narrative turning point. Elphaba confronts the citizens of a town manipulated by fear and propaganda. The choreography integrates cinematic realism with stage-inspired spectacle. Citizens react in coordinated sequences while Elphaba's movements are bold, defiant, and expressive. The camera alternates between wide shots and close-ups, highlighting the contrast between collective fear and individual moral courage. The orchestral arrangement crescendos as Elphaba's magic manifests, visually and sonically reinforcing her determination and the consequences of her actions. Glinda's arc runs parallel, emphasizing themes of privilege, moral compromise, and internal conflict. In the Emerald City, her attire, glittering gowns with reflective surfaces, symbolizes both status and superficial perfection. Chu frames Glinda from high angles, reinforcing her social prominence while hinting at emotional isolation. Grande's performance conveys the tension between public expectation and personal guilt. Her musical sequences, including the reprise of For Good, are layered with harmonic complexity, echoing the isolation and moral reckoning she experiences despite her outward charm. Fiero's development begins with quiet observations of the suffering around him, particularly the plight of Oz's animals. His choreography is restrained, emphasizing internal conflict over showmanship. Duets with Elphaba highlight emotional intimacy, their movements choreographed to convey both romantic connection and shared moral struggle. Bailey's performance illustrates that love, in this narrative, is inseparable from ethical responsibility, a theme reinforced by the consequences of his decisions. Minor characters, particularly Bach and Nessarose, are given arcs of depth that enhance the narrative. Bach's unrequited love for Glinda and his societal marginalization underscore the personal costs of political and social systems. Chu employs slow motion and precise framing to emphasize Bach's emotional stakes, particularly in sequences where his choices are constrained by forces beyond his control. Nessarose's loyalty to Elphaba manifests in moments of strategic action and personal sacrifice, providing commentary on familial bonds, ethical integrity, and the consequences of moral courage in oppressive systems. Madame Morrible, portrayed by Michelle Yeoh, is a masterclass in subtle antagonism. Her influence operates less through overt displays of power than through manipulation, presence, and linguistic control. Chu's framing places her in symmetrical compositions, often with reflective surfaces, reinforcing her omnipresence and ability to manipulate both perception and action. Her interactions with Glinda are choreographed as psychological duets, blending dialogue, movement, and gaze to heighten tension and illustrate the film's theme that true power often operates invisibly. Symbolism permeates both visual and narrative design. Mirrors appear repeatedly, reflecting internal states, duality, and self-examination. In Glinda's private quarters, mirrors underscore the tension between public persona and private moral reckoning. Architecture in the Emerald City, with geometric repetition and sterile symmetry, contrasts sharply with the irregular, organic forms of the forests, symbolizing freedom versus control. Color, lighting, and set design consistently reinforce themes of morality, perception, and societal structure. The arrival of Dorothy Gale is a narrative and symbolic fulcrum. Her presence introduces external perspective and moral clarity, forcing characters to confront truths they have avoided. Chu frames Dorothy in soft, ethereal lighting, emphasizing her otherness and her role as a catalyst rather than a conventional protagonist. Her interactions, though brief, have profound consequences on Elphaba and Glinda, challenging their assumptions and motivating critical decisions. Musical sequences are integral to the narrative rather than decorative. Each number communicates character psychology, narrative tension, and thematic depth. For instance, the reprise of For Good functions as both emotional catharsis and plot resolution, with lyrics reflecting moral growth, reconciliation, and enduring friendship. Orchestration, harmony, and cinematic integration of music with camera movement heighten emotional resonance, allowing audiences to experience characters' inner transformations. The climax occurs in a ruined courtyard of the Emerald City, symbolizing the decay wrought by fear, control, and moral compromise. Elphaba and Glinda's confrontation is meticulously choreographed, alternating duets, monologues, and silent reactions convey emotional intensity and ethical reckoning. Camera angles shift fluidly, capturing micro-expressions and subtle gestures that communicate years of shared history, guilt, and enduring connection. The musical arrangement weaves leitmotifs from prior sequences, culminating in a resolution that is both narrative and thematic. Elphaba's fate is intentionally ambiguous yet symbolically rich. She departs Oz, preserving moral victory and narrative mystique. Her legacy, partially mythologized by the citizens, reflects the film's commentary on perception, narrative control, and the endurance of moral courage. Glinda assumes a governance role that blends authority with advocacy, reflecting growth, ethical maturation, and the enduring impact of friendship and conscience. The resolution avoids simplistic closure, instead presenting a society poised between recovery and ongoing challenge, a mirror to real-world complexities. Choreography throughout the film bridges stage tradition and cinematic realism. Ensemble sequences reflect societal control and tension, while intimate duets convey emotional vulnerability and narrative subtext. Costumes evolve with character arcs, communicating status, growth, and ethical alignment. Sound design integrates ambient and orchestral elements, reinforcing narrative immersion and emotional stakes. The film's thematic resonance extends into contemporary cultural discourse. It examines systemic oppression, complicity, fear manipulation, and moral ambiguity. Female protagonists drive the story, offering nuanced perspectives on friendship, power, and ethical responsibility. Chu's direction emphasizes visual storytelling, integrating cinematography, choreography, music, and set design to create a cohesive narrative that engages audiences intellectually, emotionally, and aesthetically. By the film's conclusion, the audience experiences a culmination of narrative threads, musical motifs, and visual symbolism. The resolution balances ambiguity with catharsis, reflecting the complexity of moral choice, friendship, and societal transformation. Wicked, For Good stands as a milestone in musical cinema, demonstrating the genre's capacity for thematic depth, emotional resonance, and cinematic innovation. Following the dramatic arrival of the Kansas Girl, the narrative shifts into an intricate interweaving of personal confrontation, political upheaval, and magical spectacle. The first encounter between the Kansas girl and Elphaba is framed in a twilight-lit clearing in the forest, where rays of the setting sun pierce through the thick canopy, creating shafts of light that seem almost divine in their symbolic suggestion. Here, the filmmakers employ a subtle use of lens flares and natural light, casting the characters in a semi-ethereal glow to emphasize both the innocence of the newcomer and the moral weight of Elphaba's presence. The Kansas girl, wide-eyed and curious, approaches cautiously, her gaze drawn to the small animals that scurry around the clearing. Elphaba, initially wary, assesses the girl's intent with sharp intelligence, noting her innate curiosity and resilience. Dialogue in this scene is deliberately understated, short, careful sentences that convey as much through pauses, glances, and micro-expressions as through words themselves. The silence is almost musical, punctuated only by the natural sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, distant bird calls, and the soft hum of magic emanating from Elphaba's fingertips as she subtly tests the girl's awareness of the mystical environment. These auditory details, paired with the visual composition, create a scene that is both intimate and narratively pivotal, establishing the Kansas girl as a catalyst for subsequent events. Simultaneously, Glinda's public persona continues to fracture in sequences designed to juxtapose the artificiality of her outward perfection against the moral urgency emerging in Elphaba's sphere of influence. In a ballroom scene, Glinda delivers a polished speech to the citizens of Oz, extolling the virtues of order, harmony, and obedience. The camera moves fluidly across her face, capturing her smile, the careful lift of her chin, the precise modulation of her voice. Yet the lighting subtly shifts, with shadows creeping across the periphery of the frame to signal her internal conflict. The orchestration of background music, soft strings, gentle percussion, underscores the tension between what she says and what she feels. The audience, both in-universe and real, perceives a dissonance, a sense that perfection is being maintained at great personal and ethical cost. Here, dialogue is interspersed with visual motifs, a flicker of a candle, a servant's anxious glance, a guard stiffening at the edges of the crowd. Each element reinforces the narrative tension, emphasizing the theme that appearances can mask deep ethical crises. Musical sequences are intricately integrated into the storytelling, each number serving dual purposes, narrative propulsion and thematic reinforcement. Elphaba's central song in this segment, a reimagined version of Defying Gravity, has been adapted for cinematic scope. The number begins with her solitary figure in the forest clearing, the camera pulling back to reveal the expanse of the magical wilderness. Her voice, carrying raw emotion and defiance, resonates through the trees, while CGI-enhanced magical currents swirl around her, visualizing the energy of her moral and magical resolve. The choreography is subtle, emphasizing the emotional expression over overt movement. Elphaba's gestures with her hands, the tilt of her head, and the lift of her body suggest an ascension that is as much spiritual and moral as it is physical. The orchestral score builds dynamically, merging strings, woodwinds, and percussive elements with diegetic sounds of the environment, creating a fully immersive experience that underscores her transformation from isolated exile to moral catalyst. In parallel, Glinda's own musical moment, a reflective solo titled Light in the Shadow, explores her inner conflict. Unlike Elphaba's number, this sequence employs brighter, airy instrumentation, flutes, harp, and soft piano, yet the cinematography uses long shadows and reflective surfaces to suggest the duplicity inherent in her public role. Her choreography is restrained but purposeful. She navigates staircases, mirrors, and ceremonial spaces with a grace that conveys both compliance and latent frustration. Here, camera techniques such as dolly tracking and shallow focus emphasize her isolation despite the crowd, highlighting the psychological toll of maintaining appearances while wrestling with conscience. The juxtaposition of these two musical sequences, Elphaba's forest-bound rebellion and Glinda's palace-bound reflection, creates a thematic dialogue between authenticity and performance, resistance and complicity, inner truth and outer image. Fierro's personal arc deepens through his interactions with both Glinda and Elphaba during these sequences. A key moment occurs in the palace gardens at twilight, where he confronts his ambivalence in a quiet, unscripted dialogue with Elphaba. The cinematography employs a mixture of handheld close-ups and tracking shots to convey intimacy and fluidity, allowing the audience to experience the emotional tension in real time. Fiero's voice is low, measured, tinged with both fear and longing. Elphaba's responses are sharp but tempered with cautious hope. The dialogue explores complex ethical questions, loyalty versus love, action versus inaction, and the moral responsibility of the privileged in a system of oppression. Their conversation is interspersed with visual motifs, the wind stirring leaves, sunlight filtering through branches, subtle magical glimmers, that underscore the intersection of personal choice and larger systemic consequences. This scene is both narrative and thematic, deepening audience understanding of character motivations while reinforcing the film's central concern with ethical complexity. Nessero's and Bach's subplot escalates through a sequence of intercut scenes, depicting the tension between personal desire, societal expectation, and systemic pressure. Nessero's, attempting to assert agency in a world that often marginalizes her, faces ethical dilemmas that challenge her understanding of justice, love, and loyalty. Bach's well-meaning but flawed attempts to protect her result in unforeseen consequences, illustrating the central theme that actions, even when morally well-intentioned, are often complicated by context and perspective. Cinematography emphasizes their physical proximity and emotional distance simultaneously. Close-ups capture subtle facial expressions and micro-reactions, while wide shots place them within vast architectural spaces, visually encoding the tension between personal emotion and societal structures. The wizard's manipulation of narrative and public perception becomes increasingly apparent in sequences depicting state broadcasts, ceremonial rituals, and strategic deployments of propaganda. These scenes are staged with meticulous attention to visual composition. Banners, mirrors, reflective surfaces, and crowds are choreographed to visually reinforce control and compliance. Lighting design, often incorporating harsh contrasts and directional spotlights, underscores the performative nature of power. In dialogue with Madame Morrible, the wizard's strategic orchestration of events reveals the moral calculus inherent in authoritarian systems, highlighting the tension between personal desire, ethical compromise, and systemic preservation. This narrative thread reinforces the film's exploration of propaganda, narrative control, and the ethical dilemmas faced by individuals embedded within power structures. The convergence of narrative arcs, the moral awakening of Glinda, the mobilization of Elphaba and the marginalized, the Kansas girl's catalytic presence, and the unraveling of the wizard's control, culminates in a climactic confrontation. The filmmakers employ cross-cutting to heighten tension, interweaving sequences of magical duels, public unrest, and intimate dialogue. Elphaba's magic, visually represented through dynamic CGI currents, interacts with environmental elements, trees bending, winds swirling, water shimmering, creating a spectacle that is simultaneously narrative and symbolic. Glinda's intervention, both magical and strategic, emphasizes moral courage, empathy, and the necessity of authentic leadership. The Kansas girl's actions, small but pivotal, demonstrate the power of outsiders and the ripple effects of ethical courage. Fiero, Nessero's, Bach, and supporting characters each contribute to the resolution, their arcs converging in a tapestry of cause and effect that reinforces the central theme: individual choices, when aligned with conscience and courage, can reshape even entrenched systems of power. The resolution balances grandeur and intimacy, spectacle and emotional depth. The wizard's downfall, orchestrated through both narrative revelation and magical confrontation, serves as a culmination of the ethical and political tensions developed throughout the film. Elphaba and Glinda, having reconciled through acknowledgement of past mistakes, shared courage, and mutual respect, stand as symbols of moral clarity, integrity, and the enduring power of friendship. Musical motifs from both characters' solos recur, interwoven with new orchestral arrangements that signify transformation, resolution, and hope. The Kansas girl departs, leaving an indelible mark on the moral landscape of Oz, while secondary characters, Fiero, Nessero's, Bach, experience transformative closure, illustrating the interdependence of personal and systemic change. Visually, the final sequences employ sweeping aerial shots to encapsulate the transformed world of Oz. Forests and cities are depicted in harmonious balance, symbolizing the reconciliation of natural and societal order. Costumes, lighting, and set design converge to visually represent the thematic closure, the triumph of ethical courage, authenticity, and moral action over oppression, fear, and performative compliance. The audience is left with a profound sense of both narrative and thematic resolution, understanding that the story is not simply about magic or spectacle but about the enduring complexities of morality, identity, and human, or sentient, relationships. The opening sequences of Wicked, For Good establish the tone and stakes of the film with meticulous care, balancing exposition, atmosphere, and psychological depth. The camera lingers on Oz's forests where Elphaba hides, employing slow, deliberate tracking shots that underscore her isolation and the constant threat that surrounds her. Leaves rustle unnaturally, and subtle CGI enhancements suggest an almost sentient environment, reflecting both the beauty and the danger of a world that simultaneously protects and endangers her. The cinematography in these sequences is a study in contrasts. Light filters through the canopy in sharp, fragmented patterns, evoking the fractured nature of Elphaba's psyche, while shadows creep at the edges of the frame, symbolizing both external threats and the encroachment of internal doubt. Production design in these early moments emphasizes realism within fantasy. Forest sets are detailed with moss, twisted roots, and irregular terrain, allowing the actors to move in a space that feels physically grounded. Props such as Elphaba's traveling cloak, her worn satchel, and the few personal items she carries are designed to convey history, character, and the passage of time without a single line of dialogue. These visual cues communicate to the audience that Elphaba is not a static character but one shaped by displacement, grief, and purpose. Musical interludes are woven seamlessly into the narrative from the outset. The opening number, reimagined for cinematic scope, expands upon the orchestration familiar to stage audiences, incorporating low-register string motifs, woodwind accents, and distant choral harmonies that suggest both isolation and determination. The camera moves in rhythm with the music, creating a choreography that links visual and auditory storytelling, a technique that recurs throughout the film. As the story progresses to Glinda's public role, the contrast becomes stark. Wide, sweeping shots of Emerald City emphasize its architectural grandeur, with color grading emphasizing saturated emerald and gold tones to convey opulence, control, and performative beauty. Glinda's movements within these spaces are choreographed for maximal impact, highlighting her status as both performer and political figure. Costume design reinforces her duality. Soft pastels and intimate moments suggest her retained innocence, while structured, metallic embellished gowns worn during public appearances convey authority, public expectation, and the weight of symbolic perfection. The dialogue between Glinda and Madame Morrible is rich in subtext. Lines that seem perfunctory on the surface carry double meanings, reflecting political maneuvering and manipulation. Subtle shifts in facial expression, eye movement, and hand gestures are captured in close-up cinematography, allowing the audience to perceive tension, complicity, or resistance without explicit exposition. This attention to micro-performance heightens engagement, rewarding attentive viewers with layered meaning. The arrival of Dorothy Gale serves as a pivotal narrative juncture. Her entrance is framed with high-key lighting and an almost ethereal haze, emphasizing her outsider status and the sudden disruption she brings to established power dynamics. Camera work frequently shifts to over-the-shoulder and point-of-view shots, allowing the audience to see Oz through Dorothy's naive perspective, heightening suspense as she navigates unfamiliar, politically charged terrain. Elphaba's and Glinda's responses to Dorothy's arrival reveal their priorities, fears, and values, setting the stage for escalating conflict and eventual reconciliation. Musical numbers during this act are particularly sophisticated in their integration of narrative, character development, and cinematic technique. No Good Deed, for instance, is rendered with an intricate interplay of diegetic and non-diegetic sound. While Elphaba sings, the orchestration swells and recedes in tandem with her movements, and camera angles shift dynamically to capture both her external action and internal emotional state. Visual effects, such as magical green light emanating from Elphaba's gestures, are synchronized with musical cues, creating a synesthetic experience where sound, motion, and magic converge. Fiero's narrative arc is carefully mapped to intersect meaningfully with both Elphaba and Glinda. His character embodies the tension between desire, duty, and moral choice. Scenes depicting his indecision are often shot in reflective spaces, with mirrors or glass surfaces used symbolically to underscore internal conflict. The cinematography emphasizes these moments with slow zooms and subtle depth-of-field shifts, isolating Fiyero visually as he weighs competing loyalties and affections. Nessarose, Elphaba's sister, provides additional emotional resonance. Her experiences reflect the cost of familial bonds strained by societal expectation and personal limitation. Through tight framing, lingering close-ups, and carefully staged interactions, her story communicates pathos and catalyzes key plot developments. The physicality of performance is particularly notable in the portrayal of Nessarose's limitations and resilience, which is conveyed through choreographed movements and nuanced body language rather than exposition. As tension escalates, the film employs crowd choreography and large-scale staging to communicate the broader societal consequences of individual actions. The mob sequence against Elphaba is a masterclass in coordination, blending practical effects, background actors, and CGI enhancements to convey scale, chaos, and emotion. Camera movement is deliberately frenetic at times, simulating panic and confusion, yet cutting to deliberate, static shots of Elphaba or Glinda amidst the chaos reinforces the narrative and emotional focal points. Dialogue during these sequences is layered, with background chatter and chants contributing to world building while primary lines carry moral and emotional weight. In parallel, thematic exploration deepens. The film interrogates the nature of morality in a society driven by fear, spectacle, and propaganda. Characters are forced to confront questions of complicity, courage, and responsibility. The wizard's machinations, portrayed with both charisma and menace by Jeff Goldblum, serve as a narrative lens for exploring authoritarianism and the seductive danger of unchecked power. Conversely, Elphaba and Glinda's responses highlight the potential for empathy, resistance, and reform, emphasizing that moral clarity is rarely simple but often requires sacrifice, courage, and resilience. Visual motifs recur throughout the film to reinforce narrative themes. For instance, fractured reflections and broken glass are employed in moments of personal crisis, suggesting the instability of perception and the fragility of truth. Recurrent lighting motifs, glowing emeralds, shifting shadows, and diffused natural light, symbolically encode character states and societal tensions. Repeated visual cues, such as the yellow brick road, operate as both literal and metaphorical pathways, guiding character trajectories and audience understanding simultaneously. Musical storytelling continues to be integral. Reprises, counterpoints, and new arrangements are carefully scored to align with evolving character development. The interplay between Elphaba's darker, more grounded melodies and Glinda's lighter, soaring lines communicates both conflict and enduring connection. Scenes often intercut these musical motifs, creating emotional tension while reinforcing the enduring bond between the two protagonists. Production elements, from set design to costume, lighting, and visual effects, are synchronized with performance and music to produce a cohesive aesthetic experience. Directors, cinematographers, and production designers collaborate closely to ensure that each frame communicates narrative, emotional, and thematic content. Even minor details, such as the placement of props, the design of magical effects, or the color of ambient lighting, serve narrative or psychological purposes. Audience reception reflects appreciation for this holistic approach. Critics highlight the seamless integration of musical performance with cinematic storytelling, the complexity of character psychology, and the film's capacity to handle morally nuanced narratives. Fans of the original stage musical appreciate faithful adaptation, while new audiences engage with the film on the level of spectacle, story, and visual artistry. In conclusion, Wicked, for Good represents a sophisticated evolution of the Wicked narrative universe. It synthesizes narrative depth, musical innovation, visual artistry, and psychological nuance to create a cinematic experience that resonates on multiple levels. Through its exploration of morality, identity, friendship, societal influence, and personal responsibility, the film provides a richly textured lens on human experience, even within a fantastical world. Every scene, musical number, visual composition, and performance is crafted to advance story, deepen character, and enhance audience understanding, resulting in a work that is not only faithful to its source material but also expansive in its emotional, aesthetic, and intellectual ambition. Wicked, for Good opens with a sweeping aerial view of the Emerald City, shimmering under a golden sun, its spires gleaming as the bustling population goes about their morning routines. The camera pans across the city, revealing banners celebrating Glinda's recent rise as the voice of goodness, and the citizens' adoration is palpable. Yet beneath this gleaming exterior, tension simmers, unseen by most. The first lines of narration, voiced by Glinda herself, establish the dichotomy between appearance and reality, a city that celebrates order and virtue outwardly while suppressing dissent and hiding uncomfortable truths. Meanwhile, in the dense western forests of Oz, Elphaba lives in self-imposed exile. The camera captures the interplay of light through the towering trees, highlighting her green skin as a symbol of both her ostracization and her unique power. She moves silently among the animals, creatures whose sentience has long been denied, providing protection, teaching them survival skills, and nurturing their trust. The forest sequences are accompanied by a haunting musical number, newly composed for the film, which conveys both her isolation and her unwavering resolve to fight for justice. The song contrasts the dark, natural beauty of the forest with the oppressive artificiality of the Emerald City, immediately setting the stage for the ideological conflict that will drive the story. Back in the Emerald City, Glinda is preparing for the grand wedding to Fiero. The camera lingers on her flawless, sparkling gowns and meticulously arranged surroundings, symbolizing her carefully curated public persona. However, close-up shots reveal fleeting expressions of doubt, guilt, and longing as she reflects on her fractured friendship with Elphaba. Through a private conversation with Madame Morrible, Glinda is reminded of her duty to uphold the wizard's image and maintain public order, intensifying her inner conflict. The dialogue is layered, revealing not only Glinda's personal struggle but also the subtle manipulations and pressures exerted by powerful figures to maintain control over the city. In parallel, Fiero is shown navigating his own challenges. His character is torn between loyalty to Glinda, sympathy for Elphaba's cause, and the political responsibilities that accompany his role in Oz. Early scenes highlight his moral complexity, a charming, yet conflicted figure, through interactions with citizens, officials, and secretly with Elphaba, who he visits under the cover of night to discuss the worsening plight of the animals. This duality establishes him as a pivotal character whose choices will influence both personal and societal outcomes. The first act introduces multiple subplots: the growing unrest among the animals in Oz, whispers of resistance against the wizard's authoritarian rule, and the subtle corruption and manipulation within the Emerald City's government. These threads are interwoven through short, tense sequences, building a sense of impending conflict. Elphaba's strategic brilliance is showcased as she leads small skirmishes to protect animals from hunters and enforcers, while Glinda's increasing isolation and pressure highlight the emotional stakes of their eventual reunion. The musical numbers in the first act are carefully integrated to reflect internal states, societal contrasts, and escalating tension. Elphaba's forest song, blending melancholic strings and powerful vocals, conveys longing and determination, while Glinda's solo in the city juxtaposes brightness with a sense of fragile vulnerability. Ensemble pieces illustrate the divide between the oppressed animals and the city's complacent population, using choreography and staging to emphasize thematic contrasts. Supporting characters, including Madame Morrible and the Wizard, are introduced in ways that emphasize their influence over the protagonists. Madame Morrible's scenes depict her subtle manipulations of Glinda, shaping public perception and guiding political narratives. The Wizard, though largely unseen in early sequences, exerts presence through the city's propaganda, conversations, and the fear of retribution, setting up the central tension between power and morality that will dominate the film. As Part 1 concludes, tensions converge in a climactic sequence. A public festival in the Emerald City meant to celebrate unity is disrupted by Elphaba's covert intervention to protect an animal threatened by guards. The city is thrown into confusion, Glinda is forced to confront the realities she has ignored, and the first cracks appear in the facade of order. The act closes with an emotionally charged duet between Elphaba and Glinda, sung across the divide of forest and city, foreshadowing their eventual confrontation and reconciliation while underscoring the themes of friendship, betrayal, and moral choice. The narrative of Wicked, For Good deepens its intricacy as it transitions from broad-stroke conflicts to intimate, emotionally charged moments that define the psychological landscape of Oz. One of the earliest sequences in this section focuses on Elphaba in her forest refuge, a setting that has grown increasingly symbolic. The forest is no longer merely a hiding place, it represents liminality, the space between societal labels of good and wicked, safety and danger, freedom and exile. Each tree, each twisted root, is meticulously framed to convey both the beauty and the peril of her isolation. Early morning light filters through the dense canopy, highlighting the green of her skin in ways that echo both natural integration and societal alienation. This cinematographic choice subtly reinforces that Elphaba, while perceived as other, is profoundly connected to the world around her. Her interactions with the animals at this stage are particularly revealing. The animals, long oppressed, now act as her collaborators, providing intelligence, assistance, and emotional grounding. In one memorable sequence, Elphaba negotiates with a council of animals, their voices a mixture of sound effects and manipulated vocal tones that communicate emotion without dialogue. Here, the musical score subtly shifts to minor keys with intermittent choral textures, underscoring the gravity of leadership and the ethical responsibility she carries. The scene establishes a motif that will recur throughout the film: leadership divorced from ethical reflection, even when enacted for good, carries profound consequences. Meanwhile, Glinda's mid-arc development delves into her private life behind the spectacle of Emerald City. In her personal quarters, mirrors, glass, and reflective surfaces dominate, constantly reflecting her image in multiple fragmented versions. The filmmakers exploit these reflections to visually represent her internal fragmentation, her struggle to reconcile the heroic image imposed by society with her private conscience. In one scene, Glinda rehearses a public address, practicing intonations that convey warmth and reassurance, yet the reflection shows a subtle tremor in her eyes, a fleeting indication of her moral and emotional doubt. The score in these moments incorporates delicate strings and isolated piano notes, creating an auditory metaphor for her solitude amidst the grandeur of public expectation. The narrative tension heightens as the story orchestrates indirect confrontations between Elphaba and Glinda. A particularly poignant scene unfolds in a partially ruined amphitheater. The amphitheater, once a site of performance and celebration, now stands abandoned, a metaphor for the decay of societal illusions. Elphaba approaches, cautiously, observing Glinda as she addresses a small gathering of citizens who remain loyal to the ideals of goodness and order. The two women do not speak, but their body language communicates volumes: a tilt of the head, a fleeting glance, a momentary stiffening of posture. The filmmakers linger on these gestures, allowing audiences to experience the tension, the unspoken history, and the unresolved affection between the two central figures. In this scene, silence is as powerful as dialogue, and the absence of words amplifies emotional intensity. Musical sequences interwoven in these moments are particularly sophisticated. Elphaba's leitmotifs, previously associated with defiance and isolation, incorporate new harmonic variations that convey nuanced emotional states, a mixture of frustration, longing, and moral conviction. Glinda's musical motifs, conversely, incorporate unresolved suspensions in major keys, symbolizing both hope and anxiety. When the two motifs converge briefly in counterpoint during an almost collisional sequence, the score communicates the complexity of their intertwined destinies without a single word being exchanged. The psychological complexity of secondary characters reaches its apex in these middle-to-late sequences. Fiyero, torn between affection, loyalty, and survival, navigates his own moral terrain with increasing subtlety. In a pivotal scene, he observes Elphaba from a concealed vantage point, grappling with guilt and longing. His internal monologue, conveyed through voiceover and subtle facial microexpressions, reveals his recognition of Glinda's role in societal stability while acknowledging the ethical superiority of Elphaba's cause. This duality reinforces the film's persistent exploration of moral ambiguity. There are no perfect heroes, no pure villains, only individuals responding to circumstances with courage, fear, love, or desperation. Nessero's arc simultaneously reaches heightened narrative and symbolic significance. Restricted by both physical disability and societal marginalization, she exercises agency in surprising ways. In one climactic scene, Nessarose uses her position within the administrative apparatus of Emerald City to shield vulnerable citizens from punitive forces. The filmmakers frame her actions using low-angle shots, visually elevating her presence and signifying her newfound authority despite her physical limitations. Symbolically, her rise mirrors Elphaba's moral courage. Agency is not solely defined by physical strength or public visibility, but by ethical action and courage in adversity. The narrative's climax is structured with careful attention to emotional cadence and visual symbolism. The confrontation between Elphaba and Glinda reaches its zenith in a sequence designed as both narrative and emotional catharsis. The filmmakers employ long tracking shots to capture movement across the landscape of Oz, juxtaposing individual action with societal reaction. Elphaba's spells, luminous and imposing, contrast against Glinda's more restrained displays of authority, visually communicating the divergent approaches of moral conviction versus systemic compromise. Dialogue, when finally exchanged, is minimal but dense with implication. References to shared history, moral choices, and unspoken regrets punctuate the sequence, creating a layered emotional resonance. Music, once again, plays a pivotal role in elevating the climax. The score combines orchestral crescendos with intimate string passages, blending ensemble and solo motifs to reflect the collision of personal and societal stakes. Choral arrangements echo the voices of Oz's citizens, representing both public expectation and collective conscience. In key moments, the score modulates between minor and major keys, symbolically reflecting the uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and eventual resolution that define the narrative arc. Secondary plotlines converge in the climax. Bach, whose trajectory has intertwined with the protagonist's actions, acts decisively to protect vulnerable citizens, his courage contrasting with earlier indecision. The arrival of the girl from Kansas, Dorothy, serves as both a catalyst and a narrative mirror, highlighting the broader implications of the protagonist's choices on outsiders and society at large. The filmmakers employ cross-cutting to interweave these threads, creating a dynamic narrative tapestry that underscores the interconnectedness of personal, political, and moral action in Oz. Visual symbolism throughout the climax reinforces the narrative's thematic concerns. Cracked mirrors, shifting shadows, and recurring motifs of light and green hues signify fractured perception, moral tension, and personal growth. Costuming, meticulously designed, reflects both internal states and societal positioning. Elphaba's green attire evolves to incorporate shades of teal and emerald, symbolizing both resilience and ethical depth. Glinda's golden ensembles shift subtly to reflect both public authority and private vulnerability. Lighting design amplifies emotional beats, with chiaroscuro techniques highlighting moral complexity and intimate character moments amidst broader spectacle. The resolution of the narrative addresses both personal and societal arcs. Elphaba achieves a moral vindication that transcends public perception. Though vilified, she remains true to her principles, demonstrating that heroism is defined by ethical action rather than approval or recognition. Glinda attains nuanced self-understanding, reconciling public duty with personal conscience. Secondary characters, including Fiyero, Nessarose, and Bach, reach emotionally satisfying conclusions that reinforce the film's emphasis on the moral significance of individual choices in shaping collective outcomes. The city of Oz, scarred yet resilient, stands as a testament to the enduring consequences of both action and inaction, reflecting the film's complex engagement with societal dynamics and ethical questions. Thematic threads woven throughout the film coalesce in the closing sequences. Central motifs, perception versus reality, loyalty versus duty, courage versus fear, identity versus societal expectation, find resolution in both narrative and symbolic dimensions. Musical motifs previously associated with conflict evolve into harmonically integrated themes, reflecting reconciliation, moral clarity, and emotional closure. Visual motifs, from reflective surfaces to recurring color schemes, reinforce thematic continuity and emotional resonance. The audience is left with a contemplative space, encouraged to reflect on the ethical, psychological, and societal questions raised throughout the film. In production terms, Wicked, for Good represents a culmination of sophisticated filmmaking, integrating advanced visual effects, complex musical composition, detailed costume and set design, and nuanced character direction. Director John M. Chu orchestrates these elements to achieve a narrative that operates simultaneously on multiple levels, emotionally, morally, socially, and aesthetically. The interplay of performance, music, visual storytelling, and choreography ensures that the film is both immersive and intellectually engaging, rewarding repeated viewing and careful reflection. Ultimately, Wicked, for Good transcends conventional notions of fantasy storytelling. Its narrative, visual, and musical complexity combine to create a work that is emotionally resonant, morally thought-provoking, and aesthetically compelling. The film challenges audiences to reconsider concepts of heroism, villainy, and narrative authority, illustrating that morality is nuanced, personal integrity is paramount, and courage often requires sacrifice. Through the intertwined journeys of Elphaba, Glinda, and the citizens of Oz, the film delivers a meditation on friendship, identity, justice, and the enduring power of empathy and moral action. The film's musical journey begins with a reimagined overture that immediately signals a tonal shift from the first installment. The orchestral arrangement takes familiar themes from No One Mourns the Wicked and No Good Deed, but Chu and composers John Powell and Stephen Schwartz manipulate tempo, key, and instrumentation to create a more foreboding, tension-filled atmosphere. Strings are emphasized over brass, minor keys dominate, and woodwinds flutter like nervous whispers, foreshadowing the societal unrest within the Emerald City. The overture serves not only as a musical introduction but as a narrative statement. This is a world where morality, perception, and power are intertwined in a delicate and often dangerous balance. As the overture swells, the camera pans across the Emerald City, now visually transformed from a place of sparkling optimism to one of oppressive grandeur. Chu's decision to juxtapose reflective golden spires with deep shadows reinforces the duality of Oz under the wizard's control. Citizens move in precise, choreographed patterns, their movements synchronized to the overture, creating a visual ballet of societal control. The effect is both beautiful and disquieting, a visual metaphor for the tension between outward appearance and internal corruption. Costume design here plays a crucial role. The citizens' garments, while vibrant and intricate, are uniform enough to symbolize conformity, a subtle reminder that individuality has been suppressed in the pursuit of public order. Elphaba's forest sequences are staged with careful attention to spatial dynamics and symbolic imagery. The forest, unlike the Emerald City, is untamed and irregular, with twisted trees, shifting shadows, and dense foliage creating a sense of both refuge and vulnerability. Chu frequently frames Elphaba within natural arches formed by tree limbs, visually emphasizing her connection to nature and the animals she protects. These sequences also employ sound design to heighten immersion. The rustling of leaves, distant animal calls, and subtle magical hums create a layered sonic environment that mirrors Elphaba's internal state. In these early scenes, Erivo's performance conveys both vigilance and weariness, reflecting the psychological toll of exile and moral responsibility. The film's first major number, a cinematic adaptation of No Good Deed, serves as a turning point both narratively and emotionally. Elphaba confronts a frightened town, orchestrated by Madame Morrible's propaganda, and her defiance becomes a spectacle of both magic and moral conviction. Chu stages the scene with alternating wide shots and close-ups. Wide shots capture the scale of the crowd and the weight of societal pressure, while close-ups emphasize Elphaba's personal anguish and determination. The choreography integrates cinematic realism with stage-inspired movement, ensuring that the sequence communicates narrative stakes, character development, and thematic depth simultaneously. Orchestration builds from restrained piano motifs to a full symphonic crescendo, mirroring Elphaba's escalating defiance and the mounting threat she faces from a society unwilling to understand her intentions. Glinda's sequences within the Emerald City are meticulously crafted to emphasize her duality. Her costumes, reflective and glittering, symbolize societal admiration and status, yet Chu uses high-angle shots to isolate her from those she governs, visually conveying her internal conflict and moral questioning. Grande's performance balances outward charm with inward uncertainty, capturing the tension between the public roles she performs and the private ethical dilemmas she faces. Musical sequences, particularly reprises of For Good, are harmonically layered to underscore this duality, integrating echoing vocals and contrapuntal arrangements that reflect Glinda's inner conflict and gradual moral awakening. Fiero's arc begins with quiet observation and internalized empathy. Early scenes depict him witnessing the suffering of Oz's animals, and his physicality, subtle shifts in posture, hesitant movements, reflects the tension between his privileged upbringing and newfound awareness of injustice. Bailey's choreography during his duets with Elphaba is deliberately restrained, emphasizing emotional connection and shared moral struggle rather than showy spectacle. These scenes reinforce a recurring thematic motif: love and loyalty are inseparable from moral choice, and true courage manifests through ethical action as much as physical bravery. Minor characters receive extensive development that enriches the narrative fabric of the film. Bach, portrayed by Ethan Slater, embodies the human cost of systemic oppression and unrequited affection. Chu employs slow motion and tight framing to emphasize Bach's emotional vulnerability, particularly in sequences where his decisions are constrained by societal pressures. Nessa Rose, Elphaba's sister, demonstrates intelligence, moral integrity, and the willingness to make difficult sacrifices. Her narrative arc, though secondary, illuminates themes of familial loyalty, moral courage, and the personal costs of ethical action within a corrupt system. Madame Morrible, brought to life by Michelle Yeoh, is a study in controlled antagonism. Chu's framing emphasizes symmetry and reflective surfaces during her scenes, reinforcing her omnipresence and manipulative prowess. Morrible's interactions with Glinda are staged as psychological duets, blending verbal sparring with subtle physical choreography, creating tension that communicates both narrative stakes and thematic resonance. Yeoh's micro-expressions, an eyebrow flick, a slight shift in posture, signal strategic calculation, making her a compelling embodiment of the corrupting influence of unchecked power. The symbolic use of mirrors is pervasive throughout the film. In Glinda's quarters, mirrors multiply her image, reflecting both beauty and ethical conflict. In the Emerald City, mirrored surfaces amplify the contrast between apparent perfection and hidden decay. These visual motifs reinforce the narrative's exploration of perception, morality, and identity, reminding audiences that truth is often filtered through perspective and social expectation. Dorothy Gale's arrival functions as both narrative catalyst and symbolic counterpoint. Her scenes, lit with soft, ethereal tones, emphasize her role as an external agent of moral clarity. While her screen time is limited, her presence disrupts established power dynamics and compels Elphaba and Glinda to confront truths they have previously ignored. Chu frames Dorothy's interactions to highlight both her innocence and the transformative impact of external perspective on entrenched systems of belief. The climax, staged in a ruined courtyard within the Emerald City, is a masterclass in cinematic choreography, musical integration, and emotional intensity. The environment reflects societal decay, with broken architecture, scattered debris, and muted lighting symbolizing the collapse of moral order. Elphaba and Glinda's confrontation alternates between duets, monologues, and silent reactions, emphasizing emotional stakes and moral reckoning. Musical arrangements weave leitmotifs from earlier sequences, creating a cohesive auditory and narrative tapestry. Camera movement, fluid tracking, close-up shifts, and occasional slow motion, enhances intimacy and dramatic tension. Elphaba's final fate, revealed in a deliberately ambiguous yet symbolically resonant sequence, balances narrative closure with mythic resonance. Her departure from Oz preserves moral victory while maintaining narrative mystique, allowing audiences to reflect on the enduring power of integrity and agency. Glinda's evolution into a governance role exemplifies ethical maturation and the application of friendship, conscience, and moral insight to leadership. The denouement positions Oz as a society in transition, neither fully healed nor entirely fractured, mirroring the complexity of ethical and political reform in real-world contexts. Choreography throughout the film serves as a narrative and emotional device. Ensemble sequences depicting mobs or societal ceremonies convey themes of control, fear, and conformity, while intimate duets highlight relational dynamics and emotional vulnerability. Costume evolution reinforces character development and moral alignment, with Elphaba's attire transitioning from dark, protective layers to garments reflecting confidence and agency, while Glinda's wardrobe shifts from vibrant perfection to nuanced, reflective tones signaling ethical growth. Sound design and orchestration deepen narrative immersion. Ambient sounds, footsteps, magical hums, natural forest elements, intertwine with orchestral scoring to create a rich auditory landscape. Leitmotifs associated with characters, particularly Elphaba and Glinda, recur strategically, reinforcing emotional resonance, narrative cohesion, and thematic consistency. The film's broader cultural impact stems from its engagement with themes of systemic oppression, narrative control, moral ambiguity, and the power of individual and collective agency. Female protagonists drive the story, offering nuanced portrayals of friendship, rivalry, ethical growth, and leadership. The narrative's emphasis on perception, societal influence, and moral responsibility resonates across contemporary social and political discourse, reinforcing the timeless relevance of the Wicked universe. Musical numbers throughout the film serve multiple narrative and thematic functions. The cinematic adaptation of No Good Deed communicates both Elphaba's defiance and the societal misunderstanding of her actions. The reprise of For Good serves as a culmination of relational and ethical arcs, integrating melody, harmony, and lyrical reflection to provide emotional catharsis. New compositions, exclusive to the film, expand character depth, reinforce narrative tension, and highlight thematic motifs of moral courage, friendship, and societal responsibility. Each number is choreographed with precision, blending cinematic movement, camera framing, and ensemble interaction to maximize emotional and narrative impact. Production insights reveal a deliberate integration of stage tradition and cinematic innovation. Principal photography, interrupted by the 2023 strikes, required careful attention to continuity, performance consistency, and visual cohesion. Choose Direction emphasizes the translation of theatrical expressiveness into cinematic language, balancing spectacle with intimacy, music with narrative, and choreography with visual storytelling. Set design, lighting, costume, and sound are meticulously orchestrated to reinforce narrative themes and character psychology. The film's denouement, musical resolution, and visual symbolism converge to leave audiences with a reflective, emotionally resonant experience. Moral ambiguity, the enduring value of friendship, the consequences of societal control, and the power of ethical action are communicated through a complex interplay of visual, auditory, and narrative devices. Wicked, For Good positions itself as a landmark in modern musical cinema, demonstrating the potential of the genre to explore profound themes, convey emotional complexity, and innovate within both theatrical and cinematic traditions. The next sequence opens in the Emerald City's Grand Hall, a space both opulent and imposing, where polished marble floors reflect the dazzling light from chandeliers that hang like frozen suns. Here, Glinda prepares for an important ceremony meant to celebrate the wizard's continued success and solidify her own status as the public embodiment of goodness. The camera moves along a steady dolly, tracking her long, flowing gown of gold and cream as she ascends the central staircase. Every gesture is meticulously choreographed, a tilt of the head, a controlled smile, a precise hand movement that signals both grace and authority. The hall is filled with citizens in ornate attire, all of whom mirror Glinda's own performative precision. The film uses these large crowd scenes not just for spectacle but to reinforce the thematic tension between individual authenticity and social expectation. Glinda's inner thoughts are conveyed subtly through micro-expressions and fleeting pauses in dialogue, her lips tighten momentarily, a small frown mars an otherwise flawless expression, her eyes flicker toward a distant balcony where a report of unrest has arrived. These visual cues signal to the audience that while Glinda appears to embody perfection, her moral consciousness and personal anxieties persist, simmering just beneath the surface. The dialogue in this scene is as much about what is unsaid as what is spoken. Glinda addresses the assembly with phrases emphasizing unity, loyalty, and adherence to the wizard's decrees, but her tone carries an almost imperceptible tremor at moments when she references justice and moral responsibility. The audience, guided by camera focus and subtle editing, interprets these moments as evidence of her internal conflict. Madame Morrible, positioned to the side, observes Glinda with a calculating gaze, her subtle gestures and occasional whispered instructions signaling that Glinda's role as public icon is both supported and controlled. The interplay between Glinda and Morrible underscores a recurring theme, the manipulation of individuals by institutions, and the ethical compromises inherent in positions of visibility and authority. Meanwhile, in the forest, Elphaba prepares for a confrontation with agents of the wizard's regime. Here, the choreography and staging emphasize both the natural environment and Elphaba's mastery of her magical abilities. The camera employs sweeping wide shots to capture the scale of the forest, intercut with tight close-ups that focus on the subtle tension in Elphaba's hands, her deliberate footwork, and the controlled exhalations that signal concentration. Dialogue with her allies, animals, sympathetic citizens, and magical creatures, is concise but laden with emotional weight. Elphaba's words serve to inspire courage and reinforce shared moral purpose. She is not only leading a rebellion but also embodying a moral argument, asserting that truth, justice, and empathy cannot be silenced by fear. Music rises in orchestral swells as she channels her power, blending diegetic magical sound effects with the score to reinforce the narrative significance of her actions. Each gesture of magic is choreographed like a dance, the sweep of her arm, the rise of her cloak, the arc of glowing energy following her movements. This blending of magical effect, music, and physicality transforms the sequence into a ritualistic performance, elevating narrative tension while reinforcing thematic resonance. Fiero's private confrontation with Elphaba is one of the film's most psychologically complex scenes. It begins at dusk, in a secluded glade where muted sunlight filters through the leaves. The cinematography employs shallow depth of field to isolate the two characters from the environment, emphasizing the intimacy of the moment. Dialogue is careful, deliberate, and layered with subtext. Every pause carries significance, every line serves dual purposes, both expressing emotion and testing trust. Fiero questions Elphaba's methods, expressing fear of their potential consequences, while simultaneously revealing his own ambivalence about his duties and affections. Elphaba responds with measured intensity, her words both admonition and appeal, revealing the moral and emotional stakes of her struggle. The scene's pacing is deliberate, the silence between lines almost musical, creating tension and emphasizing psychological depth. This interaction crystallizes the film's central thematic conflict, the interplay of moral courage, personal desire, and systemic pressures. In the Emerald City, Glinda's musical sequence, Light in the Shadow, further develops her psychological landscape. The choreography is restrained but intentional. She moves through mirrored corridors, the reflections multiplying her image and symbolizing both the fragmentation of her identity and the pressure to maintain perfection. Each movement is mirrored, echoing the internal tension between authenticity and expectation. The orchestration layers airy woodwinds with soft harp arpeggios and subtle string motifs, creating a sense of delicate unease. Lyrically, the song contrasts the brightness of her public persona with the moral shadows she perceives, highlighting her struggle to reconcile performative goodness with ethical truth. Camera work emphasizes reflection and symmetry, reinforcing the thematic exploration of duality, public image versus private conscience. Elphaba's musical number in the forest, a reimagined and expanded version of No Good Deed, functions as both narrative and emotional exposition. Each line of dialogue in song serves multiple purposes, advancing plot, revealing character motivation, and reinforcing moral themes. The choreography blends practical movement with magical effects, objects levitate, branches bend, small creatures respond to her gestures, creating a visual metaphor for influence, responsibility, and interconnectedness. The orchestral arrangement is dynamic, with swelling crescendos marking moments of moral clarity and quieter passages emphasizing introspection and doubt. These musical sequences are intercut with narrative beats, brief conversations with the animals, small acts of rebellion against the wizard's agents, and glimpses of citizens responding to the growing unrest, providing both micro and macro perspectives on the rebellion. The Kansas girl's role intensifies through interactions with both protagonists. She demonstrates curiosity, courage, and adaptability, challenging both Glinda's and Elphaba's preconceptions. Dialogue is minimalistic yet emotionally potent, her innocence and moral clarity highlight the ethical ambiguities of the adults around her. Cinematography frames her in central compositions, often with light streaming from behind to create a visual halo effect, symbolizing her role as a moral catalyst. Her presence catalyzes narrative convergence, forcing previously separate arcs, Elphaba's rebellion, Glinda's moral awakening, and the wizard's authoritarian maneuvers, toward inevitable intersection. As Part 2 begins, the Emerald City reels from the disruption caused by Elphaba's intervention at the festival. The streets, normally orderly and gleaming, are now chaotic. Citizens whisper rumors of the Wicked Witch of the West, and the animals who have always been silenced. The camera lingers on Glinda, her previously immaculate composure fracturing as she witnesses the panic. She moves through the crowd, trying to calm the citizens, but each interaction highlights the growing gap between her public image and private conscience. The sequence is accompanied by a haunting ensemble number performed by city residents, blending fear, awe, and confusion, a stark contrast to Glinda's carefully orchestrated image of order. Elphaba, meanwhile, capitalizes on the disruption to organize a series of covert meetings with key animal leaders and sympathetic citizens. The forest sequences are cinematic in their intimacy, showing small groups strategizing under moonlight, with Elphaba moving like a shadow among them. Through whispered conversations, tactical planning, and displays of magical prowess, she demonstrates her growing leadership and moral authority. The musical accompaniment here is sparse, using percussive and wind instruments to create tension and underscore the stakes, reflecting both urgency and clandestine activity. The subplot involving Fiyero intensifies. While publicly engaged in political duties and ceremonial appearances with Glinda, he privately meets with Elphaba to understand the injustices that have been hidden under the wizard's regime. These secret encounters are fraught with tension. Fiyero is torn between loyalty to Glinda, fear of public reprisal, and the undeniable moral weight of Elphaba's cause. The script carefully balances dialogue, inner monologues, and subtle gestures to convey his internal struggle, emphasizing his role as a bridge between the divided worlds of city and forest, law and justice, popularity and conscience. Madame Moribel's manipulation of Glinda escalates in this act. She pressures Glinda to maintain the illusion of societal harmony, subtly reminding her that any deviation from public duty could result in both personal and political ruin. Through opulent, dimly lit chambers filled with ornate mirrors and symbols of authority, Moribel exerts psychological influence, using fear, flattery, and persuasive argument to shape Glinda's decisions. The audience begins to understand the extent to which Glinda's personal desires have been constrained by external pressures, reinforcing the central theme of appearance versus reality. The wizard's presence is further developed through citywide announcements, propaganda displays, and secret surveillance. Though rarely seen physically, his influence permeates the narrative. Holographic projections, enchanted objects, and public addresses illustrate the ways he maintains control, and subtle visual cues hint at cracks in his authority. This portrayal emphasizes the pervasive tension between systemic power and individual agency, highlighting how societal structures can manipulate perceptions of morality. A major turning point in the middle act occurs when Elphaba orchestrates a daring rescue of animals captured by city enforcers. The scene is meticulously choreographed, blending magical spectacle, suspense, and moral urgency. Elphaba uses her powers creatively, manipulating the environment, conjuring protective barriers, and guiding animals to safety. The sequence culminates in a large ensemble musical number celebrating freedom and solidarity, with lyrics emphasizing courage, collective action, and the moral imperative to stand against injustice. Cinematography alternates between sweeping wide shots to capture scale and close-ups to convey individual emotion, highlighting both the grandeur and intimacy of the moment. Glinda's parallel arc during this event is equally compelling. She receives conflicting reports. The official account condemns Elphaba's actions as dangerous, while her own conscience recognizes the righteousness of Elphaba's mission. Alone in her chambers, Glinda performs a solo number that juxtaposes her public image of perfection with private doubt, incorporating reflective lyrics and visual symbolism, shattered mirrors, flickering candlelight, to illustrate her internal conflict. The duality of Elphaba's and Glinda's experiences is underscored through intercutting, the forest and the city, rebellion and control, freedom and obligation, all playing out simultaneously in a choreographed narrative rhythm. The political intrigue deepens when city officials, under the wizard's direction, attempt to consolidate control by publicly demonizing Elphaba. Propaganda posters, public speeches, and magical illusions label her as a threat to peace and morality, escalating fear among the population. These sequences are visually striking: green-tinted shadows, exaggerated illusions of danger, and citizens' fearful expressions convey the power of narrative manipulation. Within this context, Glinda faces a pivotal choice: comply fully with the wizard's directives or risk defying authority to aid Elphaba and the animals. Subplots also explore the perspectives of secondary characters. Elphaba's sister, who has been reluctantly involved in city affairs, grapples with divided loyalties, torn between familial bonds, personal safety, and the desire for justice. Other animals, previously silent, are given voices through musical numbers and dialogue, revealing their histories, hopes, and fears. These moments enrich the story, creating layers of emotional resonance and thematic depth. The interwoven narratives emphasize interconnectedness and the consequences of individual decisions within a larger societal framework. Act 2 builds toward a dramatic confrontation. Elphaba plans a symbolic act of defiance, illuminating the forest with magical light visible from the city, signaling to all that justice and truth cannot be silenced. The cinematography captures both the beauty and danger of the act, with light piercing darkness, symbolizing hope, resistance, and moral clarity. Glinda witnesses the display from the city's towers, an emotional crescendo amplified by a duet between the two witches. The music intertwines their voices in harmony and discord, reflecting shared history, lingering resentment, and mutual respect. This scene serves as both a turning point in the plot and an emotional apex, heightening audience anticipation for the final act. As Part 2 concludes, alliances are solidifying, stakes are higher than ever, and the ideological divide between forest and city, truth and propaganda, justice and fear, is fully realized. The midsection of the film establishes that the resolution will require courage, reconciliation, and moral clarity from both Elphaba and Glinda. The narrative sets the stage for the climactic sequences of Part 3, where the consequences of choices, the culmination of subplots, and the final confrontation with the wizard and societal structures will unfold. As Wicked, For Good moves toward its final act, the narrative intensifies in both scale and emotional resonance. The filmmakers structure these sequences with careful pacing, alternating between sweeping panoramic shots of Oz's turbulent streets and intimate close-ups of the central characters' faces, allowing audiences to experience the interplay of societal upheaval and personal stakes simultaneously. The green of Elphaba's skin, once a marker of marginalization, is now a vivid emblem of moral resilience, standing out against the city's golds and muted blues, visually signaling her unwavering commitment to justice even as public perception brands her wicked. Every frame reinforces the tension between individual action and societal narrative, a recurring thematic cornerstone of the film. A crucial scene unfolds in Emerald City's central square, where citizens have gathered to witness the culmination of political tension. The filmmakers choreograph the crowd meticulously, using layered movement to depict a society caught between fear, hope, and uncertainty. Citizens murmur anxiously, children cling to parents, and animals, previously hidden observers, now emerge as active participants, symbolizing the voices of the marginalized finally asserting agency. The camera alternates between sweeping aerial views and tight mid-shots, emphasizing both the collective stakes and individual experiences. Music heightens the tension, low, rumbling strings underscore the anxiety in the crowd, punctuated by Elphaba's rising leitmotif that signals imminent action and moral resolve. Elphaba's approach is deliberate. She moves with purpose through the throng, her presence commanding attention despite her attempt to remain hidden in plain sight. This sequence underscores her transformation from outsider to moral fulcrum. Her actions, though misinterpreted by the public, reflect courage, strategy, and ethical consistency. The filmmakers use slow-motion sequences to highlight her every gesture, imbuing movement with symbolic weight. Her raised arms, the subtle motion of her hands, the glint of magical energy, all communicate her defiance, resilience, and ethical clarity. Glinda, aware of the impending confrontation, positions herself strategically within the square. Her golden attire gleams under the sunlight, reinforcing the contrast between perceived goodness and the moral compromise she navigates. The filmmakers exploit reflective surfaces, including polished floors and surrounding architecture, to multiply her image, visually representing the pressure of public expectation and the multiplicity of her roles: mediator, leader, friend, and symbol. Her body language conveys both authority and apprehension, a physical manifestation of the internal conflict between loyalty to Elphaba and commitment to societal order. The two women finally face each other, and the filmmakers stage the encounter as a choreography of emotion, morality, and magical power rather than a conventional battle. Dialogue is sparse, each word deliberate, laden with the weight of years of shared history, betrayal, and unspoken loyalty. Elphaba's voice carries a mixture of defiance, sorrow, and moral clarity, challenging the societal narrative that has long vilified her. Glinda's responses, carefully measured, convey authority tempered by regret and enduring affection. The tension is heightened by music that blends their respective leitmotifs into a complex harmonic interplay, reflecting the convergence of personal and societal stakes. Symbolic visual elements abound in this sequence. Torn banners, cracked mirrors, and shifting shadows reinforce the themes of fractured perception, societal upheaval, and personal transformation. Elphaba's green aura is contrasted with Glinda's golden radiance, creating a visual duality that mirrors their ethical divergence and deep emotional bond. Lighting, color grading, and composition are employed meticulously to convey the narrative's moral and psychological complexity, turning the confrontation into a visual symphony of character, theme, and emotion. Secondary characters continue to influence the climax. Fiero's internal conflict reaches its peak as he chooses to intervene, guided by both affection and moral obligation. His actions highlight the ethical nuance the film consistently emphasizes: courage often involves personal risk and moral ambiguity. Nessero's arc converges symbolically with Elphaba's, demonstrating that moral courage and agency are not limited by societal or physical constraints. Bach acts decisively to protect the vulnerable, reinforcing the narrative's thematic focus on the ethical impact of individual choices. Even minor characters receive narrative attention, with visual cues and subtle dialogue highlighting their emotional responses and reinforcing the interconnected consequences of the central conflict. Musical composition during this climax is particularly sophisticated. Elphaba's motifs incorporate complex harmonics and rising counterpoints, signaling both moral authority and emotional intensity. Glinda's musical lines, harmonically intertwined with Elphaba's, convey empathy, internal struggle, and moral reflection. Ensemble and choral elements reflect the citizens of Oz, mirroring the societal stakes and echoing the film's thematic exploration of perception, narrative, and collective morality. Key musical transitions, modulations from minor to major, interwoven motifs, and harmonic suspensions, underscore the emotional and ethical weight of each narrative beat. The film's denouement is equally layered. Though Elphaba remains misunderstood by society, her moral integrity is undeniable, creating a bittersweet triumph. Glinda's growth is reflected in subtle shifts in posture, expression, and musical accompaniment, signaling her reconciliation with both personal conscience and public duty. The filmmakers employ lingering shots, reflective surfaces, and carefully controlled lighting to convey closure while maintaining narrative and thematic complexity. Secondary character arcs, including those of Fiero, Nesseros, and Bach, are resolved with both emotional and ethical satisfaction, reinforcing the central motif that true heroism encompasses moral courage, empathy, and thoughtful action, regardless of public recognition. Visual symbolism remains central in these closing moments. The interplay of green and gold hues, the subtle restoration of previously damaged architecture, and recurring motifs of light and shadow signify both resolution and ongoing moral complexity. Costuming reflects narrative evolution. Elphaba's attire conveys resilience and agency, while Glinda's golden ensemble subtly incorporates softer hues to reflect empathy, reflection, and growth. Music integrates thematic resolutions, harmonically blending motifs associated with courage, moral integrity, and friendship to create a satisfying, emotionally rich auditory experience. The final moments of the film leave space for contemplation. Oz, though scarred, is shown to be resilient, a world where moral clarity coexists with complexity, where courage is measured not by public approval but by ethical action, and where friendship and empathy endure despite societal misunderstanding. The filmmakers close with a balance of cinematic spectacle and intimate emotional resonance, combining sweeping aerial views with lingering close-ups of the protagonists. The audience is left with a profound sense of both closure and reflection, understanding that true heroism, moral clarity, and personal integrity are ongoing struggles rather than tidy resolutions. Production-wise, Wicked, For Good exemplifies the synthesis of technical mastery and emotional storytelling. The integration of advanced visual effects, intricate musical composition, meticulous costume and set design, and nuanced character direction ensures that the film operates on multiple levels simultaneously, visually spectacular, emotionally resonant, ethically challenging, and thematically coherent. Director John M. Chu's vision balances spectacle with intimate storytelling, allowing audiences to engage with the narrative on aesthetic, emotional, and intellectual planes. Ultimately, Wicked, For Good transcends conventional musical fantasy. It interrogates societal narratives of heroism and villainy, explores the complexity of moral courage, and examines the enduring power of empathy, loyalty, and friendship. Through the intertwined journeys of Elphaba, Glinda, and the citizens of Oz, the film demonstrates that true moral and emotional integrity requires courage, reflection, and the willingness to act despite misunderstanding or opposition. The narrative, visual, and musical intricacy combine to produce a cinematic experience that is both immersive and intellectually rewarding, leaving audiences with enduring questions about identity, morality, and the power of narrative itself. In conclusion, the film's rich tapestry of plot, character, music, visual symbolism, and thematic exploration establishes it as a landmark in modern musical fantasy. Every narrative beat, musical phrase, and visual motif contributes to an overarching meditation on morality, friendship, courage, and societal perception. By emphasizing the ethical and emotional dimensions of individual and collective action, Wicked, For Good delivers a deeply satisfying, multi-layered narrative experience, leaving a lasting impression that resonates beyond the confines of the screen. The film begins with a sweeping aerial panorama of the Emerald City at dawn. Chu chooses a golden hour palette, with sunlight reflecting off the towering spires while deep shadows fall across the city's streets, emphasizing the duality of prosperity and oppression. Citizens march in precise, regimented formations, choreographed to match the opening overture. The camera moves fluidly among them, alternating between wide shots that show societal scale and tight close-ups that capture individual apprehension and uncertainty. Costume design reinforces this theme. Garments are bright and ornate, yet uniform, subtly signaling suppressed individuality. The overture itself is an orchestral reinterpretation of the familiar Wicked leitmotifs, with minor keys and strings-dominant arrangements creating an atmosphere of tension and foreboding. Woodwind trills imitate whispered gossip, while low brass evokes an ominous governmental presence. Every musical and visual choice communicates the film's central theme: appearances can conceal oppression, and morality is often dictated by societal perception rather than intrinsic action. As the overture fades, the narrative shifts to Elphaba's forest refuge. Chu uses naturalistic lighting to evoke both safety and vulnerability. Trees arch over her as protective canopies, yet shifting shadows remind viewers of lurking danger. The camera frequently frames her in natural arches or between dense foliage, symbolizing her connection to the natural world and her guardianship of the animals. Sound design is layered: birdsong, rustling leaves, distant magical hums, and Elphaba's quiet breathing converge to immerse the viewer in her solitude. Erivo's performance conveys both vigilance and sorrow, capturing the psychological toll of isolation, responsibility, and societal vilification. Early dialogue between Elphaba and the animals establishes stakes and moral grounding. Lines such as, "They fear what they do not understand," and "I will protect them, even if it costs me," underscore her ethical clarity. Chu stages these sequences with careful blocking. Elphaba moves among the animals in protective arcs, her gestures emphasizing care and agency. The musical underscore punctuates key phrases, reinforcing narrative emphasis without overwhelming the dialogue. This early exposition not only defines character motivation but foreshadows thematic exploration of perception, morality, and sacrifice. The first major musical number, No Good Deed, occurs when Elphaba intervenes in a town manipulated by propaganda. Chu stages the sequence as a cinematic ballet. Citizens move in coordinated patterns reflecting societal fear, while Elphaba's movements contrast with fluidity and defiance. The camera alternates wide shots, capturing the scale of opposition, with tight close-ups emphasizing personal stakes. Orchestration mirrors narrative progression, starting with restrained piano motifs that escalate to full symphonic crescendos as Elphaba's defiance intensifies. Choreography blends stage-inspired expressiveness with cinematic realism. Spells are cast with gestures that convey emotional weight and narrative impact. This number solidifies Elphaba's role as both a moral agent and societal antagonist in the eyes of others, highlighting the film's recurring tension between perception and reality. Meanwhile, Glinda's sequences in the Emerald City provide a visual and thematic counterpoint. Her costumes, reflective and glittering, signify societal admiration, while camera framing isolates her from citizens, visually communicating her internal moral conflict. Dialogue, often delivered in carefully modulated tones, contrasts public performance with private doubt. Lines such as, "I cannot save her if I do nothing," and, "I must maintain my position to help them," articulate the tension between complicity and conscience. Musical reprises of For Good incorporate harmonic layering and reverb to underscore her isolation, linking vocal performance to psychological depth. Fiero's arc begins subtly, with him observing societal injustice and experiencing moral awakening. Chu employs restrained physicality to convey internal conflict, hesitation, slight shifts in posture, and measured gestures indicate ethical reflection. Duets with Elphaba, both spoken and musical, emphasize relational depth and mutual moral reinforcement. Choreography is intimate, with gestures calibrated to suggest connection and shared purpose rather than performative spectacle. Dialogue such as, "I cannot stand by while they suffer," demonstrates character evolution from privilege to active allyship. Minor characters, notably Bach and Nesseros, receive narrative enrichment. Bach's unrequited affection and societal marginalization are highlighted through visual framing. Slow-motion sequences, tight close-ups, and angled shots convey emotional weight. Lines like, "I always wish I could be enough," underscore personal stakes. Nesseros demonstrates intelligence, moral integrity, and sacrificial courage, with sequences staged to show her making strategic decisions to protect Elphaba. These arcs reinforce the film's exploration of the consequences of ethical choice within oppressive systems. Madame Morrible, portrayed by Michelle Yeoh, operates through psychological manipulation rather than overt action. Chu uses symmetrical framing, reflective surfaces, and controlled blocking to reinforce her omnipresence and influence. Dialogue, delivered with precise timing and tonal nuance, signals strategic calculation. "Fear is the most loyal servant," she observes, encapsulating her philosophy and the film's thematic exploration of power. Interactions with Glinda are choreographed as psychological duets, combining subtle gestures, eye contact, and spatial movement to heighten tension. Visual symbolism permeates production design. Mirrors, recurrent in Glinda's quarters and the Emerald City, represent self-examination, duality, and the distortion of truth. Architecture contrasts geometric rigidity in the city with organic irregularity in the forest, visually encoding the tension between control and freedom. Costume evolution reinforces thematic alignment. Elphaba transitions from dark, protective garments to empowered, strategic attire. Glinda's wardrobe shifts from reflective perfection to nuanced, muted tones signaling ethical growth. Dorothy Gale's arrival, though brief, catalyzes critical narrative developments. Chu frames her in soft, ethereal lighting to emphasize moral clarity and narrative otherness. Dialogue exchanges, though minimal, are pivotal. Sometimes the world needs a fresh perspective, functions both as narrative foreshadowing and thematic reinforcement. Her interactions prompt both Elphaba and Glinda to confront unacknowledged truths, propelling the story toward climactic confrontation. The mid-film confrontation between Elphaba and citizens, augmented by magical visual effects and choreography, demonstrates the film's synthesis of cinematic and theatrical elements. Camera movement alternates sweeping panoramas with intimate tracking shots to maintain scale while emphasizing character agency. Spellcasting is represented with practical effects enhanced by CGI, creating visual metaphors for moral and societal conflict. Musical composition interweaves leitmotifs from prior sequences, reinforcing narrative cohesion. Subsequent musical numbers, including exclusive compositions for the film, expand character psychology. For example, a newly introduced song exploring Glinda's internal conflict uses minor key harmonics, vocal layering, and camera-controlled focus shifts to articulate ethical uncertainty, emotional burden, and relational tension. Similar sequences for Elphaba emphasize resilience, sacrifice, and the cost of moral action. Ensemble choreography in these numbers conveys societal pressure, fear, and obedience, contrasting with protagonists' expressive individuality. The climax, staged in the ruined courtyard, integrates dialogue, musical resolution, and visual symbolism. Chu employs fluid camera tracking, alternating between close-ups, mid-shots, and wide panoramas to convey both intimacy and scale. Broken architecture symbolizes societal decay, shifting light patterns reflect moral ambiguity. The confrontation's choreography merges physical movement with expressive spellcasting, ensuring that emotional and thematic stakes are foreground. Dialogue lines such as Elphaba's, "I cannot let them define me," and Glinda's, "We are stronger together than apart," encapsulate relational, ethical, and narrative resolution. Elphaba's departure, intentionally ambiguous, combines mythic resonance with symbolic closure. She leaves us physically and narratively, maintaining moral victory and narrative mystique. Glinda assumes a governance role that integrates ethical responsibility, leadership, and the lessons learned from friendship and moral reflection. The denouement leaves Oz in a transitional state, reflecting the nuanced portrayal of societal change and the ongoing consequences of moral and ethical choices. Production insights reveal meticulous attention to continuity, visual coherence, and musical integration. Interruptions during 2023 strikes required detailed planning to maintain actor consistency, visual design, and musical continuity. Chu's direction prioritizes the translation of theatrical expressiveness into cinematic language, balancing spectacle with intimacy, music with narrative, and choreography with visual storytelling. Set design, lighting, costume, and sound are orchestrated to reinforce narrative themes, character psychology, and symbolic meaning. Choreography throughout serves narrative, thematic, and emotional functions. Ensemble sequences convey societal control and collective fear, while intimate duets highlight relational dynamics and personal growth. Costume evolution reinforces character arcs and moral alignment. Sound design, integrating ambient sounds, orchestral cues, and leitmotifs, immerses audiences and enhances emotional resonance. The film's cultural impact stems from its engagement with themes of systemic oppression, narrative control, moral ambiguity, friendship, and ethical agency. Female protagonists drive the narrative, offering nuanced portrayals of leadership, relational complexity, and moral growth. The story's exploration of perception, societal influence, and the consequences of inaction resonates across contemporary discourse, demonstrating the enduring relevance of the Wicked universe. Following the initial convergence prompted by the Kansas girl's arrival, the narrative transitions into a sequence of strategic encounters and escalating tension. In the Emerald City, Glinda convenes a private council with Madame Morrible and several high-ranking officials. The set design emphasizes authority and formality, towering marble columns, polished obsidian floors, and walls adorned with banners proclaiming loyalty to the wizard. The camera tracks Glinda's movements using a slow dolly, capturing the tension in her posture, slightly hunched shoulders, hands clasped tightly, as she negotiates the complexities of loyalty, conscience, and public perception. Dialogue here is deliberate, with Glinda navigating between compliance and subtle moral subversion. She speaks of the city's unity and prosperity, while implicitly questioning the fairness of the regime's policies. Morable's responses are clipped, precise, and occasionally patronizing, reinforcing the power dynamic while hinting at her manipulative influence. Close-ups and reaction shots emphasize Glinda's internal conflict, a micro-expression, a brief hesitation, a tightening of the jaw, a flicker of doubt in her eyes, reveals her struggle to reconcile personal ethics with imposed duties. Simultaneously, Elphaba and the Kansas girl traverse the enchanted forest, preparing to meet with allies who have been quietly resisting the wizard's policies. The cinematography contrasts sharply with the Emerald City sequences. Handheld cameras capture movement and urgency, while light filters through dense foliage, creating natural shafts that illuminate characters selectively. Dialogue between Elphaba and the Kansas girl is concise but laden with subtext. The Kansas girl's observations prompt Elphaba to reflect on both past choices and the moral consequences of her actions. Here, psychological depth is emphasized. Elphaba's sense of isolation is palpable, yet her resolve to protect the marginalized is unwavering. Each gesture, an outstretched hand to calm a frightened creature, a sweep of magic to defend against an approaching patrol, is choreographed with precision, blending physical action and magical spectacle to illustrate narrative and ethical stakes simultaneously. The musical sequence, Rising Shadows, performed by Elphaba and her allies, begins in the forest clearing. Unlike traditional stage numbers, the choreography integrates environmental interaction. Vines curl around performers' limbs, leaves respond to magical currents, and bioluminescent flora pulse in sync with orchestral swells. The score, blending traditional orchestration with natural soundscapes, wind, rustling leaves, distant water, creates an immersive auditory experience. Lyrically, the number explores the tension between moral duty and personal risk, emphasizing themes of courage, solidarity, and the costs of resistance. The camera alternates between sweeping aerial shots to establish scale and tight close-ups that capture the emotional intensity of individual performers. Symbolism is layered. The forest, both protective and constraining, mirrors Elphaba's dual role as savior and outcast. The glowing flora represents the potential for transformation even in oppressive circumstances. Magical currents visually encode the moral energy and agency exerted by the protagonists. Meanwhile, Fiero's subplot advances in sequences that juxtapose personal desire with political reality. In a palace courtyard at dusk, Fiero wrestles with divided loyalties. Dialogue with Glinda emphasizes ethical tension. He expresses frustration over the regime's manipulations while grappling with affection for both Glinda and Elphaba. Cinematography employs shallow focus to isolate him within vast architectural surroundings, visually communicating his internal conflict and the weight of expectations. Musical underscoring here is subtle. Low strings and muted percussion accompany his reflective lines, contrasting with the exuberant orchestration of public ceremonial sequences, further reinforcing his private struggle against external pressures. His gestures, hesitant steps, clenched fists, averted gaze, are choreographed to convey indecision and moral tension, giving the audience insight into the psychological stakes underlying the broader conflict. Nessero's and Bach's subplot deepens in complexity as they navigate conflicting desires and societal constraints. In a sequence set in the palace gardens, Nessero's asserts agency over a political decision affecting marginalized citizens, challenging previously unexamined power dynamics. Bach, acting from loyalty and affection,